Okay, so as Barbara mentioned, we are going over the section 2 of the inventory analysis. So today we're going to cover the purpose of the inventory analysis, the planning process, the requirements, and the content. So first we'll go over some key concepts. The inventory is based on a question. So for example, what do we have in our waterfront area? The inventory consists of data describing the type and extent of existing and past features and qualities of an area and its context. The analysis is also based on a question such as, how do we use what we have as the basis for revitalization? It is basically a systematic process of sorting through the data to look for patterns and connections, opportunities and constraints for the purpose of informing the decision-making process for revitalization. The analysis should be explored and presented in the LWRP in narrative form. It should not just be a bulleted list. As a result of the work being done on the inventory analysis and input from the Waterfront Advisory Committee and the community may need to refine their goals or add new goals. Additional inventory analysis may then be needed. Purpose of the inventory analysis is to identify and describe important natural and cultural resources. The inventory analysis must be broad enough to ensure consideration of all important waterfront resources, uses, problems, and opportunities, and detailed enough to support development of a specific and realistic local program. The inventory analysis will be used to determine opportunities and constraints as they relate to the community's vision and goals. The information in this section informs the development of section 3, 4, and 5. Broad topic areas for the inventory analysis are set forth in the grant work plan. Next, we'll go over the LWRP community planning process. It first starts with establishing a vision. And next, the goals. And this is done with the Waterfront Advisory Committee. This may require some preliminary mapping and collection of basic data about the community to inform the discussion. The next step is to go into the in-depth inventory with feedback from the Waterfront Advisory Committee. This consists of analyzing the data for the issues, opportunities, and constraints. Then we refer back to the vision and goals to make sure we don't need to revise them. Next, we'll develop recommendations, strategies, and projects. So next, we'll relate those inventory to the goals through a preliminary analysis. One example that we have is improve visual and physical access to the waterfront as our goal. And we relate that to several factors. It is important to include all the factors or resources that are present as required in Article 42 and be aware that factor exists in the waterfront revitalization area. For example, as shown in this chart, you'll see that several factors relate to this goal: vegetation, topography, view sheds, transportation and circulation, building condition, building characteristics, land use, zoning, and land ownership. Therefore, these inventory factors should be discussed in the LWRP and analyzed for their positive or negative effects on visual and physical access. Next, here are some community roles. As we indicated, you'll have a Waterfront Advisory Committee who reviews and provides input on the inventory analysis. Then you'll likely hire a consultant who conducts data collection and analysis and drafts the inventory analysis section. And then there'll be public involvement, which involves scheduling meetings to gather additional information from the public, which can be added to the inventory analysis. I'll give you a little more detail about community members. They're most familiar with the community and their points of view, so they provide unique insight, confirmation, or even corrections to data gathered and conclusions reached. There may also be groups or organizations within the community with specialized interests or knowledge related to specific topics such as fish and wildlife, recreation and sporting activities, and business and industry. The advisory committee plays an important role in framing the process and overseeing the conduct of work. They may help define the scope of the inventory analysis and review the work being done by the consultants. The advisory committee and other community members can assist in data collection. In addition to data collection, they can participate in the analysis of the inventory data. Most often, it is the consultants or planning staff who are primarily responsible for conducting the inventory analysis. Technical background, experience, and expertise in putting together large, complex planning documents related to communities and natural resources are important skills for consultants and local planners to have. The consultant or local planning staff will define the methods and coordinate data collection by community members and members of the project team. And then the public will be involved at public events that are organized, including open houses, events at community-wide events such as farmers markets, festivals. Those are just a sample of some of the events. Next, we are going to go over the inventory analysis toolkit and checklist. This is a toolkit that DOS developed to provide a framework of what should be included in the inventory analysis. So you can see this is the cover page. The next page, it can be found in Appendix 7 of the new LWRP preparation guidance. Page 2 discusses the purpose of the inventory analysis and emphasizes that the collection of data informs each section of the LWRP. The graphic on this page shows the circular nature of the LWRP, that each section informs other sections, and sometimes it is necessary to go back and revisit a previous section during the planning process. Page 3 of the inventory provides the instructions for using the checklist. There's different categories that you would be selecting as you fill out the checklist. So this is one of the pages of the checklist that has a sample of different criteria that are included in the inventory analysis, such as the community profile and overview, and the summary of existing plans, projects, and initiatives that affect the waterfront. So in this case, you would again check to see if these are completed. And for existing plans, you would indicate if they're present and just provide some notes. Another page in the checklist goes into each of the components of Article 42. So you'll have one where it shows existing land and water uses. It gives you, again, several things that fall under that category, such as water dependent and or water enhanced and related issues. And you would select if it's present and a priority, not present and a priority, present and a non-priority, and not present and non-priority. For example, for agriculture, if your community doesn't have agriculture, you might say, and you have to determine if it's a priority or not priority. If it's not present, you would just indicate that in either column 2 or column 4. This is another page of the checklist as well, and it includes topography and geology, water resources and water quality, fish and wildlife, habitats and natural protective features, and visual and air quality. You'd go through the same exercise, again, determine for your specific community if it fits into any of those categories. Another page shows flooding and erosion. And then the next page shows historic and cultural resources. And then another page is the Harbor Management Plan Inventory. This is a required component of the LWRP. So you'd want to go through again and make sure you're addressing each of these areas. But then you again would determine if it's a priority or not priority, if it's present, not present. So this is really important. So again, we feel this tool will be very helpful for the community to use. And we are going to get into further detail about the Harbor Management Plan elements at the end of today's presentation. So it's the final page of the checklist. It just continues again. There's some additional things about the Harbor Management Plan. And now we have another resource we've been providing to communities that explains how an inventory what an inventory analysis is and how they relate to each other. So in this resource, it will just again give you an example of an inventory. It will tell you different traits of an analysis. So it's a cool tool to have as well because it shows the interconnectedness of the two and how they relate back to each other. So we can provide that to each community at the start of the project so they can get a better understanding of how they work together. And that's a 3-page toolkit. So then next we have a checklist for LWRP completeness. This is actually included in the guidance document, which was recently released to all participants. And we do want to make sure that this is utilized because it has all the requirements of Article 42. And you can go through and again, check off as you're completing each of those requirements. So it even includes the requirements of the Harbor Management Plan, which is included also in the guidance document. So for the Harbor Management Plan, you'll see that it lists the requirements from the regulations in 19 NYCRR 603.3. And on the right is a column where you can notate the section and page in the LWRP where the element appears. The LWRP must have a chart showing what all the requirements are addressed in the sections of the LWRP, and these pages can be used for that purpose. And these are the last 2 pages of the checklist for the HMP. So you can see again, we prefer to have this in the appendix of the document so that we can see that everything's being addressed. Next, we'll go over some individual requirements of the statute. So we mentioned Article 42 throughout this presentation. In Section 915, it indicates that optional local government waterfront revitalization programs for coastal areas and inland waterways. And that's the guidelines for developing an LWRP. And then in 915.4, the secretary shall prepare guidelines and regulations for the LWRPs. Such guidelines shall provide that the program will be consistent with the policies and purposes of this article generally, and shall include but not be limited to an inventory of natural and historic resources of the waterfront area to be protected. Additionally, 19 NYCRR 601.2 points back to Article 42, sections 911.6, 915.5, and 922 for the elements that must be included in an LWRP. The requirements in 915.5 are very important because they're used to evaluate whether the LWRP has all the content needed so that it may move forward to 60-day review. Another term you'll often see in the legislation is commensurate with the particular circumstances of that local government. It's a term that appears several times in the statute and the regulations, and we will emphasize this phrase as we go through this training. What this means is that topics are important to the community, should be addressed in a comprehensive way in the LWRP. But if a topic is not a priority, it doesn't always have to be addressed comprehensively in the LWRP. The community should explain that the topic is not commensurate with their community and address why it is not commensurate. In this photo on the right, you'll see it's an example of a busy waterfront. It's known as the Nautical Mile, and it's located in Freeport, Long Island. This community may actually have conflict and congestion in the harbor, but maybe other communities do not. So again, you have to look at your particular community and identify what may be an issue. Next, 915.5a indicates that the facilitation of appropriate industrial and commercial uses which require or can benefit substantially from a waterfront location, such as but not limited to waterborne transportation facilities and services, and support facilities for commercial fishing and aquaculture. Some examples of these uses are industrial plants requiring water for processing, commercial fishing and aquaculture, industrial docking facilities and marinas, and ferries and charter boats. The analysis portion would look at whether there is enough docking and mooring to handle the demand, whether there is enough access to the water, or whether more connections are needed, what the current and projected market demand is for the current and projected water uses. Next, in 915.5b, it identifies the increased use of access to coastal waters and the waterfront for water-related activities, such as boating, swimming, fishing, walking, and picnicking. Some examples that would be included in this inventory would be beaches, piers, boat launches, and marinas for recreational boats, waterfront parks and trails, and the location, size, number of boat slips or mooring sites, and the condition of these facilities. Next, you can go further into public access and recreational resources through the data and analysis. Some basic information about existing facilities may be available online for municipal, county, and state-owned facilities. However, direct contact via phone or meetings may be needed to find out who is using the waterfront, what activities are taking place, and what aspects might be changed or improved. A map of public access and recreational facilities should be included. And this slide is an example from the City of Oswego LWRP on Lake Ontario. Analysis of the data might include how much use the facilities are currently experiencing and whether more facilities are needed. Areas or facilities that have opportunity for expansion or improvement to help achieve waterfront goals. If the goal is to increase public access, identification of privately owned property that could be beneficial for public use or access, either through purchase, easement, or other cooperative agreement. Opportunities for connections between waterfront facilities such as bike and/or walking trails and public transit connections, and opportunities for natural resource protection in existing publicly owned properties. Next, you would identify socioeconomic characteristics for the community, also conducting a data and analysis, also summarizing data and doing an analysis. It's important to understand the characteristics of the people that live and work in the waterfront area and its surroundings, as well as the economic and job conditions. It is difficult to make recommendations about waterfront revitalization without understanding what is going on with the people in the community, such as demographic and economic data and trends. This data should be summarized in a narrative and graphs in the LWRP. Communities should not spend a great deal of time on this. An example is from the City of Oswego's LWRP. An analysis was done on population trends for each decade utilizing a bar graph. Additionally, data on individuals in each employment industry for the year 2000 was also summarized. For the analysis, a number of questions can be answered through the demographic data. Is the population rising or falling? If the population is rising, is there pressure for new waterfront development, such as recreation, housing, commercial? What is the pattern of ages among the community? Has it been changing? Are there different activity needs based on projected ages? Again, in the city of Oswego LWRP, it was found that they had high percentages of young adults and older adults and groups with very different needs. This was identified as a challenge. Another question is, what trends do you see in employment and the types of jobs that have been and are available? What are regional and national trends, and how might this be influencing what is happening at the local level? In 915C, it identifies the promotion and preservation of scenic, historic, cultural, and natural resources as community amenities and tourist destinations. So in this section, the community will promote and preserve scenic, historic, cultural, and natural resources for the benefit of the community and visitors. Knowing the history of the community from hundreds of years back to more recent events may provide important facts about your project area. Please note that the history should be summarized in a few pages. It is not intended to be a detailed historical account. However, it is necessary to provide an inventory and discussion of important historical and cultural resources. This includes historic buildings, sites, and districts, especially those on the national and state registers. Locally important sites, such as this statue of Abraham Lincoln in front of the Lincoln Depot Museum in the city of Peekskill. The statue commemorates a stop on the train at the Peekskill Freight Depot made by President Lincoln on February 19, 1861, where he gave a brief speech. Another thing would be the location, condition, and ownership of these resources and facilities that support tourism in the community, such as services, farmers markets, locations of festivals, and attractions. Next, you would cover scenic resources through the inventory analysis. Scenic quality and visual access to the water can play key roles in revitalization and support community character. It is important to identify these scenic resources so that they can be used to best advantage and not inadvertently be negatively impacted by future actions. The data would include scenic areas and important views and public access to those views, interviews with community members and visitors through such methods as mapping and photo surveys can confirm where cherished or important views and scenic resources are located. In the LWRP, a map should identify the location and extent of the best views, such as the map on the slide that depicts the village of Sag Harbor, LWRP, on Long Island. Maps can be supplemented with photographs that present the view. A complementary narrative should describe what is seen in the view and how this contributes to the image of the waterfront. The analysis component would be identifying certain questions like, how will new structures or uses impact existing views? Is it possible to remove or restore unattractive elements in order to improve the quality of a view? How can public access to waterfront views be improved or better utilized to promote revitalization goals? Next, in section 915.5e, asks that the LWRP include how deteriorated and formerly developed waterfront sites could be redeveloped, how deteriorated and unsightly structures could be removed to improve the waterfront, and whether there is appropriate new development proposed. To discuss these issues, an inventory of the following is needed: sites that may have adverse effects on public and environmental health, safety, and welfare, sites that may negatively affect the public impression and image of the waterfront. This may include hazardous waste sites, solid waste sites, and brownfield sites. Include data about type of facility, whether it is active, inactive, or vacant, past and existing use, and environmental impacts associated with the site. This data may be available through past studies or existing classification by DEC. For the analysis, discuss potential impacts on the waterfront area, issues that should be addressed, such as costs for reuse and market demand, opportunities for reuse, restoration, or revitalization of sites that are inactive or vacant, and sites or uses that are appropriate or compatible with the community vision and goals. This slide depicts a land use map. A land use map is required, but it also shows recreation, public access, deteriorated areas, and abandoned sites. On this slide is an existing land use map that was prepared for the city of Jamestown, LWRP. The inventory analysis should look closely at the map along with the data collected about the different land uses and draw a conclusion about future land use. Next, you would also include a summary and analysis of existing zoning and include a map. Researching and mapping existing zoning will indicate patterns and districts of allowable density and use within your WRA. In this example from the city of Oswego, draft LWRP, existing zoning is shown for the entire city, which, as with land use, allows for a better understanding of the relationship of the WRA to the larger city. In your analysis of zoning, you can look for patterns and relationships between zoning designations. For example, are there areas where zoning designations may conflict with each other or where existing zoning may not allow our desired use to occur? In Oswego, it was noted that almost all of the city's central business zone is the WRA. The analysis said this presented opportunities to improve the downtown and waterfront access, market water-oriented businesses, and target water-oriented tourism. There might be other local, state, or federal designations that might impact policy and land use decisions such as business improvement districts. These should be included in the inventory. The next section of the legislation is 915.5F, which indicates you must address how local aesthetics are considered by the community in the design of new structures and redevelopment in the waterfront area. On this slide, you'll see a cornice in the village of Sackett's Harbor on Lake Ontario as an example. And this was included in the community's local design standards. In the inventory consists of current local laws that address aesthetics such as architectural review standards, site plan review, and the zoning law. The analysis should discuss whether the local laws on the books are adequate to apply the required aesthetic considerations as stated in 915.5F. The community may need to propose amendments to existing laws to address aesthetics in their local review processes. An example is the development of design standards that align with historic features, included facades of buildings. In Section 5 of the LWRP, the community will discuss existing local laws and laws necessary to implement the LWRP in more depth. Another thing to include in the inventory is agricultural lands. Agricultural land can be important to the community for economic factors, landscape character, as an open space resource, and or because of community history and image. Agriculture is not included in Section 915A through F. However, information must be included in the LWRP because of the requirement in 19 NYCRR 601.3 that the LWRP be consistent with the coastal policies. Of the coastal policies, policy number 26 addresses agricultural lands. So in the inventory, data would include identifying and mapping agricultural districts in Section 25AA of the state law, mapping soil types, identifying types of farming, which could include dairy, cattle, horse, pig, chicken, vineyard, row crops, orchards, and vegetable truck farming, just to name a few. And then in the analysis, it would discuss available and productive agricultural land in the coastal area and along inland water bodies and their importance to the community. Discuss whether prime agricultural land may be threatened by development pressure. And then just to know, agriculture can be a source of environmental problems. So discuss practices and approaches to land management that can mitigate or prevent these problems. and then further discuss economic viability and the contributions of active and inactive farms to the history and visual character of the community. And then in 915.5G of the legislation, the protection of sensitive ecological areas should be covered. So for fish and wildlife habitats, they contribute to ecosystem health and provide support for all life cycle stages of fish and wildlife. Preserving valuable fish and wildlife resources also has important recreational, economic, and community benefits. So in this section of the legislation, it states that the LWRP should discuss sensitive ecological areas in the waterfront, which includes dunes, wetlands, fish and wildlife habitat, and the coastal land features that protect these areas. The LWRP should ensure that land use and development pressure won't affect these important natural resources. As a reminder, you could use the inventory analysis checklist and indicate if they're present in a priority, not present in a priority, present in a non-priority, or not present and non-priority, to determine whether factors are commensurate with the community's circumstances. We will show examples of the inventory analysis of sensitive areas on the next several slides. So fish and wildlife habitat areas. As part of the data, you would cover New York State significant coastal fish and wildlife habitats. We abbreviate it as CFWH, or we call it SIGHABs. And these habitats have been designated by the New York State Department of State. Designated habitats are delineated on the coastal area map and accessible through the department's Geographic Information Gateway. And a description of each habitat, its fish and wildlife resources, and potential impacts is included in the habitat narrative. If present, each of the SIGHABs should be discussed in section 2. Include the condition of the habitat, the species that use it, and the human use of the habitat. Consider if it is common or rare, replaceable or irreplaceable. Include the Department of State habitat narrative for each SIGHAB and the map in an appendix to the LWRP. LWRPs are for the waterfront areas that contain SIGHABs are required to protect these designated habitats and are encouraged to use local land use controls for habitat protection. Locally important fish and wildlife resources and habitat should also be discussed in the LWRP. Discuss any plant, animal, bird, and fish studies or inventories that are relevant to the waterfront area and include species lists in an appendix. You can also include critical environmental areas. The abbreviation is CEAs. CEAs are designated by a local or state agency to recognize a specific geographical area with one or more of the following characteristics: a feature that is a benefit or threat to human health, an exceptional or unique natural setting, an exceptional or unique social, historic, archaeological, recreation, or educational value, or an inherent ecological, geological, or hydrological sensitivity to change that may be adversely affected by any physical disturbance. And in the analysis, you'd want to address some questions such as, how will the municipality protect the locally important habitats? Is there a local law, setbacks, or an overlay district to protect the habitats? Is there a map of locally important habitats? If developing a local law, you'll need a map to show these habitats that are going to be regulated. Next, some natural protective features. As defined in the Environmental Conservation Law 34-0103, includes beaches, dunes, shoals, bars, spits, barrier islands, bluffs, and wetlands. Associated natural vegetation is also considered part of natural protective features. These features are nature's way of protecting our shorelines. A shoreline may experience dramatic change when exposed to harsh weather conditions or haphazard development. It is essential to investigate the waterfront area and document the existing conditions of the natural protective features that provide protection and/or are sensitive to inappropriate development. Include the location, extent, and condition of each of these types of features. It may also be useful to research and document these natural features to determine what changes have occurred to them over time and what impact this change has had on the waterfront or shoreline. Data sources may be available through scientific reports related to waterfront revitalization area, regional weather stations, and historic records and photographs. It is also likely that within your community, there are residents who can provide anecdotal information about past shoreline conditions and storm events. In the analysis, you should identify resources that may need protection, what is currently being done to protect these areas, and whether the community needs to do more to reach their goals and attain community resilience. Next, you would address flooding and erosion. Similar to agriculture, flooding and erosion are issues that are not included in section 915A through F, but information must be included in the LWRP because of the requirement that LWRPs must be consistent with the coastal policies. So reflecting on the importance of these issues, there are 7 policies that address flooding and erosion. Investigation of flooding and erosion for the LWRP is very important for communities where flooding and erosion are identified issues or problems. Also, all communities where there are water bodies with associated floodplain management maps should examine the maps to determine if any portion of the waterfront area is within the flood zone. Due to potential climate change impacts, even waterfront communities that do not have identified flood risk today should assess flooding and erosion risk by shoreline reach area. The inventory should include state-designated coastal erosion hazard areas and maps, FEMA-designated flood hazard area and maps, floodplain insurance studies, and associated floodway maps prepared by FEMA are available online at the FEMA mapping service. The DEC continues to update floodplain maps for various regions of the state in partnership with FEMA using cutting-edge geographic technology. The inventory would also include studies of shoreline reach areas that assess flooding and erosion risk, and an asset inventory for risk assessment. I will turn it over to Barbara to go over the risk assessment section.
All righty. Thank you, Lisa. So to continue on with requirements for the inventory and analysis, we're expanding a little bit here on flooding and erosion risks. And at the Department of State, we're doing a lot more work on resilience planning and how that can be included in LWRPs and also LWRP implementation projects. So for the LWRP itself, these are the topics and facilities that should be included to start looking at what are your risks to your community and your facilities from flooding and sea level rise and other climate change impacts. So the inventory would include things like water supply, sewage disposal, and include the location, condition, and capacity of those facilities, roads and railroads, and community services facilities such as senior centers, municipal halls and offices, library, hospitals, and healthcare facilities, police and fire stations. And then, very importantly, structures that can cause flooding, such as impervious surfaces, bridges, and culverts, and include a map of these assets to show which ones may be in flood-prone areas. Then the analysis of the risk assessment. We're going to talk a lot more about this in session 5 of the LWRP training, but just to summarize it here, once you do an inventory of those facilities that are maybe at risk in your community, you would then conduct an assessment of those facilities, needs and opportunities, and how to look at investment and action strategies. One of the things I wanted to mention about this is that we're we're emphasizing this in our LWRPs and implementation projects because back in 2016, Article 42 was amended again when the Community Risk and Resiliency Act was passed in New York State. And in Article 42, language was added to support resiliency under the financial assistance section, which relates to all our grants. And what that says is projects shall take into account the future physical climate risk due to sea level rise and/or storm surges and/or flooding based on available data predicting the likelihood of future extreme weather events, including hazard risk analysis data, if applicable. So basically, this clause was included so that we can emphasize the importance of doing the risk assessment in an LWRP and implementation projects, because we're the coast, we're the coastal area where these things are happening, as well as our inland rivers. We're going to talk again in session 5 of the training about tools that we have for this, risk assessment, spreadsheets and maps. But just to say at this time, the analysis can include determining the feasibility and type of development, given the potential and history of flooding in your community. The analysis should also discuss that critical infrastructure that, if it was lost or taken out of service, would have a serious detrimental effect on the health and well-being of your community. And the analysis would also consider if additional capacity is required for certain infrastructure and how that will affect redevelopment. So again, we're going to do a lot more about this in session 5. Also related to erosion and flooding that should be included in the inventory and analysis is data about topography, geology, and soils. And that's important for, as well as flooding and erosion, also agriculture potential and suitability for development. So the inventory should include maps of soils, topography, and geology, discussion of significant differences in elevation, like hills or bluffs, surface drainage or poor drainage areas. Geology can affect a site or areas suitable for certain types of development. So data on soil types in combination with topography can indicate areas that may be prone to erosion, which would be important to discuss in the LWRP. And then significant rock outcroppings and other features may be either scenic resources or something that's could be an impediment or could be a bonus to the community, certain geological features. So analysis would include, how does the topography affect use and development of certain sites? Are there issues related to accessibility because of the steep topography, opportunities for overlooks or viewshed protection, or constraints based on suitability of slopes, and whether locating facilities the community is interested in having, such as, say, a senior center or a healthcare facility, that whether the topography is going to be an impediment to some of those goals that the community has. So those are the analysis factors. So now let's shift slightly and talk about harbor management plans. And the requirements for these are, again, laid out in the regulations, but they are much more specific than the general LWRP inventory and analysis requirements. In 601.2 and 603, there's very specific requirements for harbor management plans. Also wanted to remind you again, the harbor management plan can be integrated into the LWRP. It can also be located in an appendix, but we encourage you to integrate it because, as we've shown, some of these things overlap with the other inventory and analysis requirements. Also, as a reminder from last week, if you don't have a defined harbor, think of the harbor management plan as the water side of your LWRP. We know everybody doesn't have a busy harbor like the one in the nautical mile in Freeport. But the idea is to talk about the water side of your LWRP. The other reason that we need to include harbor and waterfront ports in the inventory analysis is one of the 915.5 requirements, number D, is the strengthening of the economic position of the state's major ports and small harbors. So that's one of those requirements that our attorneys will be looking at to see if it's discussed in your LWRP. So let's go into these requirements more specifically. So the 603.3 is where these contents are spelled out. And again, there's that phrase, to the extent commensurate with the particular circumstances of your community. And again, we recommend you use the checklist, both the inventory analysis checklist and then that checklist that's in the checklist for LWRP completeness. Those last 3 pages can be used as your chart to show where the different HMP requirements are in your LWRP. So those are 2 tools you can use. So the harbor management requirements are to identify the boundary, which would be in a map. It should be in the very first map of the waterfront revitalization area, and then also a more detailed map of the harbor management area. Then this group of requirements relates more to the analysis, discussing issues of local importance and regional importance to your harbor. So a lot of times your harbor will overlap with neighboring communities and even the regional area if you have a busy port. So discuss that in the LWRP. You can go beyond your boundaries to discuss those regional importance issues related to the harbor. And then identifying constraints to the public's use of the waters and also underwater lands. That's going to be different for different parts of the state, but is something that needs to be addressed. Additional requirements are discussing water dependent uses. We mentioned those earlier this morning, but I wanted to give the definition of that just as a reminder. What does that mean? Water dependent use is defined as an activity which can only be conducted on, in, over, or adjacent to a water body because such activity requires direct access to that water body, and which involves, as an integral part of that activity, the use of the water. This, again, is the heart of the local waterfront program, encouraging and making sure that we allow water dependent uses to site on the waterfront. And they include things that we've already talked about: shipping, navigation, dockage, marinas, mooring, yacht clubs, boatyards, commercial and recreational fishing. They're typically important to the community's economy and may be part of your history. The thing to think about, though, is that our waterfronts are also attractive for water enhanced uses. And so what are those? That would be a restaurant or even a waterfront park. You don't have to have a park on the waterfront, but it's really nice to have a park on the waterfront. So you need basic choice, and there might be conflicts between the water dependent use and water enhanced uses. But this all, flows back to what the vision is for the community. So the analysis should look at those issues and opportunities and look at patterns and changing trends of land use related to water dependent and water related uses, and make sure that the water related or water enhanced uses won't replace the valued working character of your community's waterfront. This is an example map from the village of Sag Harbor on Long Island, and shows both existing land and surface water uses on the same map because, as we all know, land uses affect the water. So this is just an example. It's to show how you can depict land and water uses together on one map. If you have a busy waterfront, it might be good to separate them. All depends on your circumstances. Some additional requirements in 603.3 describe the waterway usage and navigation, especially existing navigation channels, and any existing water use districts or regulations. If you already have a harbor management law, mention that in section 2. As Lisa mentioned, section 5 goes into more depth about your local laws. And section 2 lists them and just give a brief summary of that local law. Then the analysis describes the issues of intensity and conflicts of use, impacts on natural resources in the waterfront, and as we already mentioned, regional needs for your harbor or waterfront area. Commercial activities is emphasized in this group of activities, and they need to be inventoried, including shipping, boating, fishing, sail-fishing, aquaculture, and mariculture. And every time I talk about this one, I have to look it up, but aquaculture is fresh or saltwater cultivation of plants or animals for food. Mariculture is a subset of that, cultivation of marine organisms for food in an enclosed section of the open ocean. So those are in the regs, and if they're present, you need to talk about them in the LWRP. Uses that due to their intensity may affect water quality and adjacent uses include things like solid waste management. Is there a landfill right on the water or in a wetland area? Mining, public parks, beaches, and other public access areas, recreation going on in the waterfront, and dredging. This one is really important because water depths relate to what you can do in your waterfront and affect decisions both about in-water activities and as well as on land activities, including waterfront access and how you're going to use the waterfront. So dredging, if that's something that's important and ongoing in your community, this will be part of the analysis. What is the cost to maintain those navigation channels? Are they affecting the achievement of your vision and goals because of the cost of dredging? And should these issues be researched to better understand the cause and the effect it has on boating and what's going on in the waterfront? The first one on this slide, habitats and other natural resources, is a requirement for the harbor management plan, but we have already talked about that as part of the LWRP inventory analysis requirements. So we covered that pretty well a few minutes ago. A little bit more about water quality, though, is emphasized in the harbor management regulations, since that affects public health and safety and recreational use, affects wildlife habitats. So things that should be inventoried should be the existing water quality, description of point and non-point pollution sources. Point source, of course, is a sewage treatment plant. Non-point source would be roads, can be agriculture, can just be commercial areas as well. Sometimes marinas and boating destinations where concentrations of boats and fuel are being dispensed can be areas where water quality is affected. There also might be areas that have pollution sources outside of your waterfront. So that's another topic where you can look outside your boundary and talk about what's impacting water quality within your boundaries in your harbor management area. As I mentioned, local laws that have provisions related to water quality should be just discussed briefly here, but and then in more depth in section 5, but zoning, erosion sediment control, stormwater management, wetland protection, those types of laws relate to water quality. So give a list of those in short description in section 2. Then your analysis of this part would question how your existing water quality could potentially affect achievement of your community's goals. And look at the data to yield a better understanding of the issues that you're facing and begin to focus strategies on how to achieve your goals for improved water quality. Finally, I think we're almost at the end here. On this slide are issues that we've already touched on this morning for the LWRP as a whole, but are mentioned under the harbor management regs. Open space should be discussed where existing land use, public access, and habitat protection are covered in section 2 and in other areas. Aesthetic values need to be addressed, as Lisa already talked about. In the harbor management plan inventory, it would be related to harbor and waterside uses with aesthetics. Water dependent uses, here it is again. In the 600 to 603 regulations, water dependent uses is listed 23 times. So that just shows how important that topic is. And then these last two requirements relate to the rights of the public to access the waterfront. These topics are important to include in the LWRP. Public trust lands is defined in 600.2, and that's defined as lands. Public trust lands means those lands below navigable waters, with the upper boundary normally being the mean high water line or otherwise determined by local custom and practice. Public trust lands, waters, and living resources are held in trust by the state or by the trustees of individual towns, that's on Long Island, for the people to use for walking, fishing, commerce, navigation, and other recognized uses of public trust lands. So the specifics of how that applies to your community should be discussed in the LWRP. So in summary, the inventory and analysis will give a foundation for understanding your resources in your community's waterfront area. In the beginning, you should have developed a vision working with your community so the community can determine and explore opportunities and constraints as they relate to the vision and as they relate to the data. Then the inventory and analysis will answer that question Lisa mentioned at the beginning. How do we use what we have as a basis for getting there and achieving our goals? And as we also mentioned earlier, sometimes you'll get to the end of the inventory, sometimes even in your project session, and realize you need to go back and do more work on part of your inventory and analysis. That happens a lot. It's not unusual. So the result is that your inventory analysis can lead to responsible decisions informed by the data that you have collected. And this helps ensure that your community can make place-appropriate decisions for development, taking into consideration the complex conditions that exist in your community, protect your natural resources that are important for environmental well-being, but also contribute to the economy and to recreation activities. Protect your cultural resources that represent the history and image of your community. Enhance the economic viability of revitalization strategies by providing accurate and current information as the basis for decisions. And here's a final reminder about the resources that we've talked about. The new updated LWRP preparation guidance was emailed to everyone. If you didn't receive that, let me know. Send me an email, barbara.kendall@dof.ny.gov. I have requested it be posted on our website. I should be done within a week. So next week, hopefully I'll have a link to that on our website when we have our training session next week. And then the checklist for LWRP completeness is in Appendix 1 of the new guidance. That's the one that has all the sections. And then the inventory and analysis toolkit is in Appendix 7. And both those are fillable PDFs. If you download the guidance document, you can use those as fillable PDFs. Okay. Here we go. First question for today. Do you have a good example of an LWRP that has successfully incorporated all the elements required for a harbor management plan? In the LWRP guidance, we use the example of Union Springs, which is an inland waterway community, and in the Finger Lakes. And that one, in the guidance document, there's a chart in the appendix that shows how Union Springs did that exercise of listing the requirements on the left and showing where they're located in their LWRP on the right. But that doesn't include the LWRP itself, where the narrative. So, but you can go online and look under our Department of State website and search for LWR, Local Waterfront Revitalization Program. And hopefully all of you on this call know that you can scroll down to the bottom of that page and all our LWRPs are posted. The ones that have been approved by the Secretary of State are on that website. So then you could then search for Union Springs and then see how they incorporate it. For a coastal one, we haven't decided yet. We were just talking about it. We need to talk to a couple other staff that have worked with coastal communities and decide which one we'd like to pick. So we will let you know in the next week or two what we recommend as a coastal one that's a good example of a harbor management plan. The next question is, Town of Schodack and Village of Castleton have an LWRP team assembled as required, 5 from the town, 4 from the village, with old LWRP we're revising. With a grant, we're hiring a consultant, the contract has been approved. We're being confused by Waterfront Advisory Committee, whether that refers to the 9 of us or whether that's the term for when we enlarge the group to include stakeholders. And is there a distinction between the two groups? Your Waterfront Advisory Committee is the larger group. So it's the 9 of you plus whoever you add, other people that are going to be coming to your meetings and helping with development of the LWRP. I guess you don't, we use the term interested parties rather than stakeholders now, but I'm not sure what you mean exactly by this question. If you're talking about having stakeholder meetings or focus groups, those people wouldn't be on the committee unless they were interested and wanted to become part of the committee that meets regularly. So I guess that there is a distinction between if you have separate meetings with different interested parties and public meetings where people come, those people wouldn't be on your committee. But if it's people that are interested and would like to be part of the process, then yes, they would be on your Waterfront Advisory Committee. And in the LWRP guidance and the first session of this training, we talked about thinking about the committee fairly broadly as to who you involve: local environmental groups, business people, other organizations, the county, any regional planning groups. Representative from those groups should be on your Waterfront Advisory Committee. So I hope that answered your question. Okay, I guess that's all the questions. All righty. Thank you very much, everybody. Next week, we'll be going into the LWRP policies. And that's it, I guess, for today. All right, so stay tuned and hopefully we'll see you next week. Thank you very much. Have a good day.